Hello, everyone. This is Noreen. And this afternoon, I have the great pleasure of introducing Durga Leela, the founder of the online learning platform and sangha called Yoga of Recovery. Durga is an advanced yoga practitioner, having completed both the Sivananda Yoga Teacher's Training and an advanced yoga training. She is also extensively trained in meditation and Vedanta. Durga is a clinical Ayurveda and Panchakarma specialist trained both in the US at the California College of Ayurveda and also in India. Durga serves as the director of the Ayurveda Programs at the Sivananda Ashram Yoga Farm in California. She's been doing that since 2003. Here's a sampling of Durga's current online programs: Healing the Habits That Bind, Longing and Relationship, Healing the Habits That Bind, Sweet and Love, Healing the Habits That Bind, Prana and Progress, Healing the Habits That Bind. Durga also runs a Yoga of Recovery Panchakarma trip to India, 3 to 4 weeks every year. There's so much to focus on with Durga. She is unbelievably prolific in helping individuals go deeper into the recovery pathway and to live happy, contented, and productive lives using the tools of Ayurveda and yoga. But since we have limited time today, we'll focus on Durga's new book titled Yoga of Recovery, Integrating Yoga and Ayurveda with Modern Recovery Tools for Addiction, which really is an encapsulation of Durga's decades of work in this field. Welcome, Durga.
Hi, Noreen. Nice to be here. Strange to hear that introduction, but yes, decades already. Time flies.
I'm assuming it's decades, but based on our professional relationship, but perhaps I misspoke a little bit there.
No,
when did you actually?
I actually started my Ayurveda studies in 2001. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so we're
years.
Amazing.
I'm coming of
age. You're coming into sagehood. We won't say sainthood. Don't worry. Well, awesome. So I really meant it when I said, I believe, lots of people, they write books, but this is really, it seems to me your books is really 2 decades in the working. This is your life work. And the book is a representation of your life's work. But why don't we start a little bit about your own personal journey, how you came to this work initially?
How I came to this work. This book is where I concentrate mostly on Ayurveda to help us with our recovery pathway, whatever recovery pathway that is. So therefore, the work starts from my own recovery pathway. And, before that, a life of addictions. And I say addictions because I was affected by the addictions of others as a child. So I grew up with that atmosphere. I think these days you call it adverse childhood experiences, and people really doing the best they could with what they had. And yet, like these emotional and psychological issues, this disease of addiction was affecting us, but we weren't really allowed to admit it or talk about it. So it's strange effects on all of us because it is known as a family disease.
Well, actually, I want to just interject there as well. I mean, my understanding is you are Scottish, I'm Irish. My parents are from Ireland. So I think, do you think that, I know addiction is typically steeped in denial, but that, that sweeping under the rug or not wanting to talk about it, do you think that's also cultural? Because I noticed that in the Irish culture, that they tend to be very reserved. We don't talk about things outside the home. We don't talk about emotions. Did you feel that some of that was cultural in your part as well, your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Cultural, we have to look at social norms when we're looking at the addictiveness that is affecting us. And some of the social norms are really like low-level addictiveness. And so therefore, it's a drinking culture in both Scotland and Ireland, but that doesn't mean everybody's affected by the disease of alcoholism.
Sure.
But I think in some sense you would say initially it meant a lower bottom before somebody would kind of look and say, well, maybe that person does have a problem. And in truth, I have this image of a cartoon that I saw once, and it made me laugh, because you know, in Ayurveda, we talk from the 5 senses, and I always say the 6th sense that you need is a sense of humor, because especially because
I read that in your book, and I love that.
Well, it's kind of true, and the Scots and Irish definitely have a good sense of humor. So
They do.
Maybe it was a Celt that drew the cartoon, but the cartoon was standing at the graveside with someone being buried, and someone says, perhaps they did have a problem, you know, like it's taken them to ultimately death, and then someone's maybe touching into the idea that, yeah, maybe they did have a drinking problem. And that's kind of how I found it. And yet at the same time, if anybody touched a drug in the area that I was in, they were immediately an addict. So it's cultural, you know. Like,
right,
you know,
right. It's family, but also the larger culture. Family being community and the larger culture.
Yeah,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Well, you know, you made the point about the 6th sense being a sense of humor, but and the Irish and the Scottish, and I love that joke that you shared. Oh my goodness. But maybe the sense of humor, you know how in Ayurveda we're always trying to balance, you know, in those cultures, you know, there's a bit of dreariness with the weather and kind of just the folklore and all of it. Maybe the sense of humor is an attempt to balance.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think so. And it's funny because I was just thinking about that the other day, that, you know, also like some of the highest drinking rates are in like Russia and Scotland and Ireland, which are Northern European, which are colder countries. And, you know, we work from pairs of opposites. Yeah. So alcohol is fire water, and you're living in cold countries, but it's also a sense of connection, because the culture was the pub, and people went to the pub, and the pub was like your community center. And, you know, the alcohol warmed you. It gave you that sense of sociability. And most people, probably the majority of people, partake in that, and they're not alcoholic. And so I don't want to be saying that Scots and Irish are all alcoholics. That's not what I'm saying.
No, of course not.
But, you know, it's the pub culture. But within any culture, I guess there's points of a culture that can bring some of us to a disease state. Like in the USA, if you look at the nationwide culture and their relationship with food, you could say that the relationship with food in the USA is bringing people to a state of disease, but not everyone. But there's a high propensity of it, perhaps, you know.
Actually, that's what I really loved about your book and your work, is that we are, by our nature, our human nature, because we are sense beings, we embody this body and we're sense beings, that we are by nature, our mind is addictive by nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I think your book does that I really love is it's not really a book for if you have an acute addiction, whether it be alcohol, food, whatever other substances, but it's really for anyone who notices that there are things, you know, the habits that bind us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That there are habits that they want to remedy, and that they're willing to step on this path, this journey, to really a more contented, happy, productive life. Mm-hmm. So to me, your book casts a broader net. Do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, as best I can. What comes up for me as I hear you speak about that is, like, to say the book is not for, how did you say it? Like, not for just the alcohol and drugs, and maybe not for the people who are like in the acute aspect of active addiction. And yet I'd counter that to say those people will be reading the book and seeds will be sown, because that's how I found the healing process, is that in the desperation and darkness that is addiction, even in its secrets, We haven't admitted it to anybody. We are desperately searching for some kind of solution for ourselves. And sometimes it's not through the regular channels. I don't show up at my doctor's office and say, I think I might have a drinking problem. Can you help me? And I think partly the reason we don't do that is because we don't like the solution people are going to offer us. Like, I mean, this is how I think about it. I knew I was an alcoholic for years, but I couldn't admit it because I couldn't see a life beyond these habits that bound me, you know, and it was a coping mechanism in the way I reacted to life, in my beliefs, in my emotions, in my thought process, in the sense of who I was. I needed these things to crutch me through so I could walk through my own life. And then I think there's a fallacy to a lot of people think a person is addicted to one thing, whereas I really do prefer to talk about our addictiveness. Just like you said, the mind is addictive. The mind gets into this rut of seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain, which is really intelligent, you know, but how do you then balance that into, if we're not just biochemical beings and we're not just emotional thinking beings either, like there's all these different layers to our being. So some people suffer at different layers of being than others. So some people have like really distraught and like trauma bonds at the emotional relationship levels. And other people maybe have kind of like good relationships, fairly good success, but they have a kind of a gap at that existential level. Like, is there meaning to this? Is there something beyond this? And I think oftentimes we'll find those people to be like maybe creative people, like, and they're bringing forth things, but what the world is offering them at the rational, at the material level, doesn't fill them. And I think we are looking for this fulfillment. And I'm going to say in the 21st century, it's not enough to give me my base needs and then keep layering upon that what I call just extravagance and luxury. You know, I think we've arrived at the point of the journey as people on this planet where we really need to evolve the more subtle aspect of ourselves, you know, the emotional aspect, the kind of higher philosophical thinking, the idea of unity concepts, that what we do in our own backyard, what we do to the creatures and the plants and the environment around us is affecting all of us. So moving out of the myth of separation somewhat, which is, I think, what Ayurveda gave to me purely by calling me a 5-element being like taking the idea that here I am, you know, embodied, and I have this idea that this isn't the total aspect of my being, like this embodied life, like I'm born and then I die and I get, you know, what, 60, 70, 80 years and that's it. That's not really my belief system. So the fact that someone had put on this idea of a more eternal self, but an elemental self, that still fascinates me, that the eternal spirit encased in matter of 5 elements. And so the 5-element connection connected me to others. It connected me to nature. It connected me to like a balance of qualities that was being displayed outside in nature constantly and dynamically, you know, different in different places, but always coming to its own point of balance naturally. And so that really opens up a great potential in me to be part of that. And I just heard John Douillard speaking about learning about the pulse and learning about the dosha times of day. And, you know, when you get to a quiet and subtle enough understanding of the body and its workings, that he could feel the changes in the pulse according to the different times of day, like different aspects of light. And he mentions, and this is what really connects me to it, the fact that birds and whales can migrate across the planet without any maps, without any GPS, that there is some intelligence that is working. And that's what I needed to connect to because the addiction, the depression that I had was leaving me choosing death rather than life, because, you know, my pleasure had become pain, and yet I was stuck in that cycle. And so therefore it was such a gift to find Ayurveda as my like lived solution. And that came from my foundational recovery pathway. And there's many recovery pathways. They're all to be celebrated because our society recognizes that we are addictive beings. But the biochemical model of, you know, the allopathic Western model system, they have, I'm going to say, really quite amazing now acute care. They didn't have it a few decades ago, maybe. They didn't have it around my mother's death from alcoholism. Or if they did have it, they weren't offering it. So they have that. But for me, I didn't receive treatment from the allopathic medical model. Really, that wasn't my solution. So therefore, it's interesting because there's lots of people in this field, and, you know, they really do have like tremendous compassion and tremendous service, and they dedicate their life to, you know, healing and serving others in the medical field. And I think in this century, like that, as much as they've done, the gaps in care really indicate that we need to bring back the community, the circle, the holistic aspect, rather than focusing on this, here's the disease and here's the cure from the biochemical limitation, you know. So I think it's good to step into a new century, this 21st century, and, you know, the rapidness of the world events that are showing us something more whole is being called for, rather than this kind of division, disease, and like despondency that a lot of people are feeling. Anyway, that's enough.
Yeah,
of that.
Those are good word choices. The 3 Ds that you. But let's note that one as well. I don't want to laugh about that. I want to connect with Ayurveda as a healing system, and specifically, in your book, you talk about when you start. Ayurveda is very much about times of day, times of life, attunement with nature, you know, the seasons, all of it. And really, the word that comes to mind when I think about Ayurveda is alignment, you know. Mm-hmm. But specifically, you say that by adopting certain practices that are really physical practices that you're going to be doing during the day, at the cusp of the seasons, certain times of life, that this is really the key to healing. It's like the first layer of healing, in doing these things, that we have the capacity to heal our brain, essentially our mind. And it's really, I mean, addiction can be both physical dependency, but certainly the mind is intricately is integral to addiction. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, can I talk about that? Like I was looking for myself for something practical, and like by the time I moved towards Ayurveda, firstly, I was already a yoga practitioner on the mat. You know, I would go to yoga class. I went to yoga class as a practicing alcoholic when I was in London with a corporate job. And then I did a geographic to America. I got sober, and that was the first thing I did beyond my recovery pathway. I went back and took yoga classes, and there was something in that just always replenished something in me. It reached something in me that, like, I couldn't describe to anybody, but I could feel it when I did that practice. And I wasn't interested in describing it to anybody either, because it felt like in the same way that I hid my active addiction as best I could, like I wasn't discussing it with anybody, I think there's a level of healing that is beyond words almost. It's hard to describe. But then there's also this waking up every day and how do I feel? Like I often say, what condition is my condition in today? And I had a lot of health issues, but they weren't issues that I was going to run to see the doctor about. And, you know, what's my personal history with doctors? I would go to see the doctor when I needed a sick line because I'd been unable to show up for my work, and I could easily get one. I could tell the doctor whatever I wanted to tell the doctor and get what I wanted from the doctor. This was over in the UK. But then I got to the USA, and firstly, you had to pay to see the doctor. And like I had a more honest relationship because I was no longer an active alcoholic, and I didn't need to, you know, cover my tracks with all my disruption that active addiction did to my ability to show up. So like I would wake up and I would have a headache, or I wouldn't have slept, and I'd be wondering like, what's wrong with me? Because that's my whole mindset. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. Like I'm not making it. Like, you know, I'm not worthy. Just whatever inner dialogue is going on. So I really needed something to help me. And when I teach this work to, you know, yoga therapists or people that want to join the online community, we call it between the mats and the meeting, because I feel like a lot of us might have some kind of like practice at the gym or going for a walk or yoga practice on the mat. And we might have a meeting with a therapist, a yoga therapist, a holistic practitioner, a recovery pathway. And then I'm going to say for the other 22 hours of the day, I was just floundering. And I'm kind of amazed that I don't know how to live, because I've been through educational processes. You know, I've got my degree, I've got my professional education. I was well paid in corporate. So how can I be this dumb when it comes to being able to make myself feel well? And so therefore, I talked about my resonance with the idea of my actual embodied being as a representation of these 5 elements, and what I see outside myself, I'm experiencing within myself. That really brought it home to me. And then what I concentrate on the book is the fact that Ayurveda then gives us like daily routines and seasonal routines that I just get up and do. And I don't get up and do them because I need them or because I'm in the mood for them. I do it because I'm living in a body. So the same way that I would, you know, lock my door when I leave my house, or the same way that I'd put gas in the car to get it working, I just had to give that much practical application to what I'm going to do for this body. And in the biggest hope that I had, and this is really baseline, I really hoped that I would end the suffering of constipation. I would end the suffering of craving of sugar. I would be able to sleep at night rather than during the day. And I would have some kind of energy to feel like I was going to be able to re-uptake my life. Because my phrase around this, Noreen, is I had the hunger that food wouldn't resolve, and I had the tiredness that sleep didn't take away. So I was just constantly hungry and tired and kind of moody. Like I had this, I think, swings, you know, where I was still like looking for more of the high, the excitement, the drama, the gossip, but it didn't really feed me. And without being able to medicate that away, or in truth, what I was really doing was medicating with lesser substances, then it was just this kind of half-life. And I was like, I want to live my sobriety the same way I lived my addiction, like full on. I want this to be good, no half measures. And so therefore, Ayurveda gave me that. And I'm going to say what it gave me was the ability to treat myself for the niggly issues. And it gave me like a sangha, like a community of people who were interested to use their body in a state of wellness to serve better, you know, to contribute something to life. And that those combinations really appealed to me. So I'm really grateful you mentioned I take people on a trip to India. I really needed some care as well. You know, sometimes I just need to receive. And that's not a passive popping a pill and, now that's alleviating my symptoms. When I first went and took a panchakarma detoxification process treatment in India, I was floored. I was just amazed by what I call TLC, tender loving care, touch, eye to eye contact, conversation, concern, like hearing the person, witnessing the person, asking like, what's your journey? Who are you? Where have you been? Where are you going? Like, and how can we support you? Like, that was just incredible to me. And so like, even as I speak of it now, and if anybody's listening to this, there is a system of medicine that offers care at a social level, a shared care in a circle that you can partake of. And I often speak of this word, it's a continuum of care. So at any point in my day, I can apply this physical principle, and then that helps relax my mind, and it helps me remember why I'm here, in amongst all the noise of bad news, fake news, inflation, recession, wars.
Right.
That can easily derail me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I love the way you described it as shared care. And I think many of us, especially those who've been in recovery, who have had been on a recovery pathway, there is a challenge in actually receiving care. It doesn't mean we're necessarily givers, because we can also be miserly. I think that's also used, that term is used in the big book as well. But we can have challenges receiving care and allowing ourselves to receive care. I also, in the book, you talked about, and it came up with what you just shared about the gunas. In Ayurveda, we have these, you can elaborate as to what they are, but the gunas, and specifically the gunas of rajas and tamas, and how they relate to addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And can I do that in the short space of time we have? To pick up on what you were just saying, that this receiving care. Yeah. I mean, so I'm going to say to you that I had the experience of having a body treatment, and then the therapist walking me back to my room and actually bathing me. And like my thing was like, stop, I can do this. I'm not that sick. And what's at play for me is self-sufficiency. Like, I'm kind of safe if I can be self-sufficient. If I start to depend on people, and this is partly, I speak of this in recovery within a program called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. So like, my ability to survive is based in my idea of self-sufficiency. So the other aspect of like the difficulties of addiction in our like sense of self is that self-sufficiency is also, it's based in the myth of separate self, which we get to in holistic healing, but it's also based in a kind of selfishness that I need to see that I'm right first. But like, because it's a myth of the separate self, I can never really get right, because there's always one need begets another need. And it's just like a continuous stream of desires that have to be met. And yet I'm never really satiated. I'm never really fulfilled. And so,
well, don't you think it's also, well, I like what you said about self-sufficiency, because, we can look at self-sufficiency as an attribute and a positive quality. But everything has its like the bigger the front, the bigger the back. It has its shadow side as well, and that is that it's a survival mechanism. You're not allowing yourself to trust. You're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're not a full participant in life, and you are separate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think what you say, there's these two sides to it. But we get stuck out on one aspect of it, and that's part of the suffering, not being able to balance it by like I'll be mainly self-sufficient, and then I'll find a few people that I can trust, because we can't say just go out there and trust anybody you meet. Like
No.
you have the capacity for like judgment of character, and so that has to operate, and it's well known that codependent people, for instance, maybe trust too soon, too quickly. They give too much initially and then they're disappointed. So we have to learn boundaries. We have to learn a sense of self. And so that's what I think the science of self-healing did help me. And so let's go back to what you were asking me about the gunas. So I've mentioned the fact that I'm an elemental being. And so let's say the body image stuff played into this. Like I remember having my corporate job in London, and a lot of the females, what they kind of compared themselves around was their outfits, their hairstyles, their weight, their size. And like this was my playground, and I was never really that amused by it. I was kind of bored by it, but I was also never the right size. I was never the right, I didn't fit into that like very rigidly defined aspect of beauty. And then I was like, I get defiant. So I'm like, well, throw it away. I don't want it. So I was rebellious, I was defiant, but I was still kind of held into this cultural expectation of who I should be as a young 20-something female. So again, the two things are operating at the same time. And then again, when I find out I'm a 5-element being, and we look differently, the body appears different according to the predominance of the elements within us. When I find out that, I had a kind of pioneering spirit. I had if it's traditional, I don't want to know about it. What's new? What's like, where's the juice in like the modernity? And so I had that, and like I was judgmental, I was critical, I was impatient and intolerant. Like I didn't have much time. Doesn't suffer fools gladly is how I was in my corporate world kind of thing.
Sure.
I was also friendly towards those that I approved of, but if anybody came along that I didn't like appeal to me or were too upper class or something, then I would be very defiant. Yeah. So the elemental aspect of the constitutional self helped me understand the subtle instrument of mind, emotions, thinking, thoughts, beliefs. Yeah. And the aspect of a fire type compared to an air type, compared to a water type, in yoga of recovery, we say the air types tend to get anxious, the fire types tend to get angry, and the water types tend to get like overly attached and sentimental. So if I was to take that and sitting in my recovery rooms, in the rooms, as we say, I hear them describe my psychological issues as like, here's a warning sign: when you're restless, irritable, and discontent, stop for a moment, find a pause point before you take the next action. So the air types, they do get restless. The fire types get irritable. And the water types have this kind of sense of discontent, sometimes just with the present. They prefer the past, they're sentimental, they're nostalgic. So then I begin to understand it, like, okay, so even this elemental self that makes me like a bigger bodied girl, not the tiny, what did we used to call those supermodels?
Sure.
That we were supposed to aspire to.
Like the Kate Moss.
Yeah, physique. And that's who I was growing up with.
I was going to say Goldie Hawn, but that's way back.
Yeah, that's before my time, but and I was like, well, I come from Scotland, you need a bit of meat in your bones if you're going to survive up there, so like that's not going to work for me. And we're not hanging around on beaches in Scotland, swimwear is not something that we're wearing. It's generally cold and wet and cloudy and windy, so like, my body was made for the environment that I was living in. So beyond that, so the body aspect, mind aspect, culture.
I want to just touch on your point about you use the phrase elemental beings, and I love that actually, because in Ayurveda we always hear about the constitution And of course, that word can be off-putting by itself. And then we hear about, so the Constitution being kind of our natural state of being, our harmonious state of being, what we're born with. And we hear about the doshas, and of course, then it's challenging sometimes for people to understand what the doshas are, but you're really saying, you're really drilling down and saying, there's 5 elements in nature, earth, fire, let's see if I can name them. Earth, fire, water, fire, air, and ether, and that we're part of nature. There's a unity there, and that we all have a unique nature. And so with that unique nature, we're going to have certain qualities that come along with that, and we're going to have certain vulnerabilities and proclivities. And I love when you talked about the doshas, which are just these combination of our 5 element being, and really what our vulnerabilities are in the addiction process, and just in general, kind of the things that we really need to watch out for. Because one thing that I think people on the recovery pathway could be saying, well, how is, many people have heard of yoga, they go to yoga class, and to me, if they step into a yoga class, they're on the evolutionary pathway, they're going to want to know more about yoga than asanas at some point. And so however they come into yoga, that's wonderful. But Ayurveda, many people haven't, it's not relatable to many people. And if somebody is early in recovery, or even a couple of years in recovery, you use the word relatable in your book, and you also use the word practical. So how is this practical? Really, people want to improve the quality of their lives. So, I mean, that is really the big thing here, that, how will embarking on this journey, and many people have described when they're in a 12-step recovery program, that at some point they feel stalled, they feel limited, like they're not really growing. There's something more. And not that Ayurveda and yoga are going to replace their recovery pathway, whatever program they choose, but how do these, and a lot of what you do is you draw parallels in the book as well. Like you talk about time in the book from an Ayurvedic perspective, and then you use the slogan that's used in 12-step programs, 1 day at a time. And, the cumulative effect of the things that we do. So all of these things is, if a person's early in recovery, midway in recovery, or they've been in recovery for decades and they're feeling stuck, and there's other habits that are binding them in their lives. How is your book useful? How is Ayurveda practical?
Yeah, so firstly, I would say, because it's a multi-layered view, it does help to read the book. And it does help to feel where you resonate with it. So there's the whole thing of take what you want and leave the rest. Right. Because as I meet people, and let's say that this is a people-centered healing program, it's not always looking at the disease and the cure. It's looking at the person, their energetic imbalances, and ways that we can apply care in a relatable and practical way. And
that's so beautiful. It's person-centered, beautiful, person-centered, not disease-centered.
I also want to say it's planet-centered. So it's for us now on this planet, the people on the planet now, today. And it's also like,
I actually love what you shared earlier as well about our responsibility to the planet today is not just, and to our community of all beings on the planet, but fellow humans specifically, that it's not enough that, we're evolving as a species. And so we should expect more and we should do more.
Yeah. So let's just say, like you were saying, a person in recovery might come to a yoga class and then eventually they want more than asana. And what I would say, and this is from my experience, that a lot of what they want more of is they want to become a meditator. And so to go from a physical practice to a meditation practice, that's a journey in and of itself. And it's always going to be happening. But then I think there's a judge sitting there like, I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing it well enough. Like, it's hard for me to sit and just suddenly clear my mind. There's a lot of misunderstandings of what meditation is, but we consider meditation to be the spiritual piece. So for me, Ayurveda is the bridge that allows us to walk from the sense of self that is embodied into the sense of self that is transcendent and unlimited, which is eternal. And Ayurveda helps us recognize the vehicle that we're in, recognize the terrain that we're on, like what season are we in, what stage of life are we in, what state of imbalance are we in. And I think, if anything, that was a big part of what I'm trying to speak of, especially in this aspect of my work, is that we do need to embody recovery. So we need to embody the fact that we need to get up and, like, there's 3 pillars of life in Ayurveda: the ability to eat, so appetite, digestion, elimination. That aspect is a pillar of life. The aspect of sleep and rest, to be able to take the energy that we have to offer and give of ourselves, and then able to rest at night and replenish ourselves through sleep. And then also this last aspect, which, the 3 pillars of life I first learned is food, sleep, sex. And so sex was the ability to take that nourishment and take the rest and activity and bring forth life. That's a biological urge, not within every individual, but within the people on the planet. So this idea of being able to procreate, but for some of us also just create a life, a life that we're living, a life of usefulness, a life of purpose. And that's something that I think a lot of people are looking for beyond a pleasure-based life. They are looking for a life of meaning and purpose. And sometimes what we're offered is pleasure. And I've said this, then we dress it up. So you get your basic needs met. And then it's like, and then we'll meet your greed, and then we'll meet your ego needs endlessly. So we'll give you a better car and a designer outfit and a bigger house, and that's supposed to fulfill me. But what we're seeing is that doesn't fulfill me. So what I'm saying about the 21st century is the holistic practices are taking us back to our wholeness. So from a point of, you are consciousness. Consciousness is living you through, like, the vital energy of prana running through these 5 elements. So this medicine is based on that as it's starting. So you are whole and you deserve to experience like sukha and swastha. So the idea of good space, like your body is good space, it's comfortable. And swastha, the idea to be established in the body that you are, the body-mind system, so that you understand the vehicle that you're driving, you understand the terrain that you're on. So early days, I read a recovery book and it said the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. And so it's very experience-based. So like, here's the thing, this is how practical Ayurveda is to me. My washing machine is down in the basement. So I carry my clothes down there and then I wash them, and the dryer sits right beside my washing machine, but I go back up the stairs with my laundry basket because I like to hang my clothes outside because I live in California.
Sure.
And if you go Scottish weather, we just think California is amazing. So why would you ever use a dryer?
Well, it is.
It's amazing. So I was noticing how heavy the basket is coming back upstairs. Even although my washing machine has done a good spin cycle, but the clothes are now wet.
Of course.
And so we're talking about this experience-based, qualitative, felt sensation of what it's like to be alive today and how you're going to balance those things. And I'm saying you're probably going to come to this because you're not a perfect meditator, or you can't do those perfect postures in asana, which is the ego's desires for this 100% perfection. It wants control. And then we're going to have to draw you back into sit in the idea that consciousness is living you and then begin to feel into those qualities. So my lesson in Ayurveda just yesterday was noticing how heavy the basket is coming back upstairs to take it out to my backyard and hang it on my washing line. And then yesterday my washing machine broke. So I was able to get the clothes, the water went out, but it didn't spin. And so therefore, I had to get the clothes out and I took them up sopping wet. And then imagine how heavy that was then.
Okay, yes, I can only imagine.
So understanding that spectrum of how an element can be in my life. So water can just be a good flow, it can be juicy, or water that's getting too much and stagnant can just block flow and make me heavy and not be able to get off the couch. So therefore, how am I going to deal with that? Like, for instance, a lot of the Western medicine wants to give you a diuretic. So if you've got high blood pressure, so you've got too much pressure building in the system, we're going to give you something, you're going to urinate it out. Is that the only way? Well, it's not the only way. There's other ways to reduce the water. There's other ways to like allow the water to be in flow. Like we can sweat it out. We can get it moving by heating it up. And so I observe this all the time. Like I put water on the stove to boil, and when it's cold, it's just sitting there, and then when it's heated up, it's moving and it's bubbling. So I understand that of my own system. Like if I sit all day at my desk, that's what I've got. I've got this kind of heavy, cool stagnancy. And then if I get up and go out for a walk and get things moving, then I've got this more replenishing flow. So that's how I use it.
No, that's great. That's I loved your description of, I'm sorry about your washing machine, by the way. I wonder what you and I were chatting about the new phrase new word that my friend coined, child opportunity. I wonder what the child opportunity there was for you. But I love how you described, and that example was perfect. I never expected an example like that. I mean it. I love that. Brilliant. Because you brought in the continuum, of a particular element. And then you also brought in, we're talking about Ayurveda and the practical aspects, and it's a lot about noticing and observing, and it's experiential. So it's very, very practical. And
I think it's comparing, because like I find the ability to hang my wash on a laundry line and get them dry, because I live in California, compared to Scotland, and so therefore there's that ability to recognize that me moving through different different countries, different communities, that I'm going to interact with a lot of different qualities. And to me, compassion is to be able to sit with that other person and like get some feel for how are they living with their own qualities, like how have they been able to like apply action so that they're not suffering with the qualities. And like we're in a transition right now because we're moving from a summer season to a fall season. So I instantly recognize I'm happier that we're not like over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature, like because I've got enough fire in my body that too much fire is an obstacle to me. So I think when we have conversations like that based on like consciousness, but the actual felt experience of living it, and then taking the steps that we are told to do to be well, to be healed, to be better people. Yeah, like to be emotionally sober in this challenging life, then like these little clues, this little invitation to what's that feel like for you, instead of this expert advice, like this is how it should be. So we often in recovery say, stop shooting all over yourself. Like, how does it feel for you? Because we'll be good just hearing your felt experience. And then we'll educate you to be able to bring in some simple therapies for yourself that will help you overcome some of the like bodily challenges. And this is, we say a lot of the disease is stress-based, it's lifestyle, chronic disorders. Addiction falls into that. So, another thing that I feel is that as we move it more and more towards the allopathic solution, and we go more towards drugs and surgery, then it's good for acute care, but they're not very well set up for the connection we need for the chronic care, the lifestyle care. So we're up against this over professionalization of the medical system, where like lots of people are bringing in social prescribing. Lots of people are bringing in, like, I think the UK brought in some minister to deal with one of the main things that causes disease, which is loneliness.
Oh, absolutely.
Social prescribing to connect something. Like often people that have been in a spousal relationship for a couple of decades and the spouse dies, and then they're just suddenly left alone. Perhaps they had all the professionals there at the care level. And so you're busy with all that, and then suddenly the person passes away. So not only did you lose your significant other or your parent, then you're left into this kind of huge like gap of anyone even showing up to see how you're doing, and you've got to pick up your life again. And we can't be treating that with antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills. Like that might help.
I know. It's just
stage, but it's not working. And
well,
so
it's definitely not sustainable. So
yeah.
But I love the words that you use there. That really Ayurveda offers us clues. It's an invitation. That's beautiful. And that the majority of our diseases are lifestyle-based chronic disorders, including addiction. And that sometimes social prescriptions are really useful. And many times they are, because many of the diseases are really starting in the mind and the mental, emotional level. So manifesting in the body. Durga, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to transition into, we're going to wrap up, but before we do, the pandemic was big for you. You moved I believe, was that the time when you moved your platform online?
Yes.
Okay. I know you're still you're continuing to do your online platform. Which is, and why don't you tell me what's happening for you now? Your book came out within the last year. What's on your plate now? What's important to you now? How are you evolving? What are you doing with Ayurveda now? How are things shifting and evolving for you?
Mm-hmm. So what's important for me is consistency and community, and expanding the idea of who we are in courses. So like people hear that I run a yoga recovery course. So I'd like to say it's a creative conversation based on this, wholeness, based in consciousness and lived experience of now. And the consistency aspect is that I did bring the book out in May. And then we followed it with the course, the online teaching and collaboration, participation piece that is called Between the Mat and the Meeting. And that ran through the end of August. And then we launch into the other part of my work, which is called Yoga of Recovery, Healing the Habits That Bind. And you mentioned that at the beginning. And that is the 6 tenets of yoga of recovery. So this is really where we take the embodied practices, but we're now looking at it for this evolutionary journey of like the soul and our deeper understanding into like the mystery, the true meaning and purpose of life, and how the yogas help us there. And so that's what we do generally through September to March, and it's 3 different segments. We call it Unpacking, the 6 tenets. So currently we're doing longing and relationship. And on the 5th of November, we'll have our first live class on Life is Sweet and Life is Love. So Life is Sweet is about how can we use our 5 senses to give us nourishing self-soothing, so that we can step away from the self-destructiveness that our self-soothing has become, especially in our kind of in addiction encouraged consumer societies. And then in January, we're going for our Panchakarma trip. And then in February and March, we're back to the tenets of life as prana and life as progress. And I'm going to say this, life is longing is about the spiritual aspect of the disease, and life is a relationship that we're in right now is about the connection aspect, and how the yogas help us. They identify common pitfalls of our nature and then give us practices and perspectives that we can set our sights at a different level and, take action on a daily basis that brings that to fruition, feeling connected without giving ourselves away into codependency and losing ourselves. So I just have this, and I want to say this because Nick Cave just brought out a book called Faith, Hope and Carnage. And I was listening to it. Nick Cave is a singer. And he says something in the book that is I just listened to it and I wrote it down because it's right in line with what we're speaking about in Life is Longing. And he says, I think there was always a yearning within me for something else, something beyond myself, from which I felt excluded. Even in the most chaotic times when I was struggling with addiction, I always felt envious of those who had a religious dimension to their lives. I had a kind of spiritual envy, a longing for belief in the face of the impossibility of belief that addressed the fundamental emptiness inside me. There was always a yearning. And so one of our definitions of addiction is when more is never enough. And so therefore, when we go into the 6 tenets of yoga of recovery, we're going into that longing, that yearning, that these are no longer going to be filled just by the material. We need to move to the subtle realms that develop in ourselves in this subtle way, and the spiritual. Yeah,
that's beautiful. Well, that's thanks for sharing that. That was really beautiful. That reminds me of, in Ayurveda, they say you're already whole. And you bring that up in your book in terms of the lake, the water, or the Mona Lisa as well, I believe. But it's when we start from the premise that we're already whole, then there's unlimited possibilities, and there's more than hope. That there's a real potential and possibility for healing. So, so thank you, Durga. And I know that your website is yogaofrecovery.com.
Yeah, so the website is yogaofrecovery.com. And then you can email me, Durga, Durga for Apple, Durga, at yogaofrecovery.com. And I'd be happy to hear from you, especially if you've got the book, reading the book. If you've got the book, please rate a rate and review it online. It's up against the giants of Amazon. That's what we need to get recognized without having to pay Mark and all that. I will advertising.
I will submit a raving review after, so this week for you after reading your book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So awesome. And again, Durga, do you have a copy of your book with you? Do you want to hold it up?
I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. And the title of your book, just announce the title of your book again, just so that it's fresh on people's minds.
Yeah, it is called Yoga of Recovery, and it's me, Durga Leela, and you'll get it on Amazon. You can look at my website and there's a page there, and there's a page that gives the resources that relate to the book.
Okay.
And as I say, that we get together on this. So not only do we run courses covering all these topics, we have open all fellowship 12-step meetings that's part of the gathering, and we have book discussions that are part of it. And then people who have done an initial course with us join us for what we call kinship, which is just, discussing how we're getting on with growing into this, like higher, more conscious life, more aware. We do these trips, healing trips to India and stuff. I'll also be, I will be speaking at the National Ayurvedic Medical Association conference next year. There's going to be a panel discussing addiction. I have to say, everybody wants to talk about, cannabis and psychedelic assisted treatment, and what does Ayurveda think of that, the plant-based medicine. So I think some of those things are now coming up. I just had a long session with the Colorado Ayurveda Association that was talking about such things. And then I'll be going down to the Bahamas, and I'll be there next May offering yoga of recovery there. And at that same time, we'll have Dr. John Kelly from the Recovery Research Institute from Harvard in the Bahamas with us, along with Dr. Ramkumar Kuti from India, who runs the Ayurveda clinic. So the three of us will be there together, offering a program, 3 programs that you can participate in together. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's at the Sivananda Ashram in the Bahamas?
In the Bahamas, yeah. Sivananda Yoga Retreat, Nassau, Bahamas.
And typically, are you posting those events on your website as well?
Yeah, I just need to do that pretty soon.
Right,
so yeah,
sure.
Look at us on Facebook and Instagram. It's Yoga of Recovery, and you'll
I'll
see
include
us.
those too.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Durga, thank you so
much.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate you joining me today, and thanks again.
Thank you. And yeah, if anybody hears this, just email me and let me know how things are in your life, because it's kind of weird always this Zoom thing. So be in touch.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you, Noreen.
Absolutely.